My name is Peter Maravelis, and on behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers, I'd like to welcome you to a special edition of City Lights Live. We are happy to have with us today Jon Savage. We'll be exploring the subject of his new book titled This Searing Light, The Sun and Everything Else, Joy Division, The Oral History, published by Faber and Faber. Mr. Savage is a world-renowned writer, broadcaster, music journalist, and cultural critic. He has written extensively about rock and roll and late 20th century pop music with an emphasis on punk rock, post-punk, psychedelia, and other trends, and is, in short, one of the planet's great historians of late 20th century youth culture. Mr. Savage is the author and co-author of numerous books. His published works include England's Dreaming, Anarchy, Sex Pistols, Punk Rock, and Beyond. Also the book Teenage, The Creation of Youth, 1875 to 1945. He has written sleeve notes for numerous bands, including Wire, Saint Etienne, and the Pet Shop Boys, among others. He is responsible for several music compilations, including Fame, The Secret History of Post-Punk, 1978 to 81, Queer Noises, From the Closet to the Charts, 1961 to 1976, and Dreams Come True, Classic Electro, 1982 to 1987. His writing has appeared in many seminal grassroots rock and roll journals, as well as major pop music magazines and newspapers. These include Search and Destroy, Slash, Bomp, Melody Maker, New Musical Express, The Face, Sounds, Los Angeles Review of Books, amongst others. His book, England's Dreaming, was used as the basis for a television program, Punk and the Pistols, which aired on the BBC. His book, Teenage, was adopted into a film by Matt Wolfe. He has collaborated on books with such esteemed writers as Hanif Kureishi, and his list of projects, articles, and compilations is extensive. If you'd like to learn more about late century countercultural trends in pop music, youth culture, he is definitely your man. So joining him in conversation today is none other than V Vale. I can't think of a better interlocutor, as the two of them go back such a long way, really to the very beginnings of punk. Vale is the founder of the seminal journal Search and Destroy, which was one of the first publications to explore the newly emerging punk music scene of the late 70s. It was really one of the places to learn about punk rock. He later went on to found Research Magazine, which led to the influential Research Publications. Cannot say enough about that here. I mean, the history of which really requires a kind of a program and a documentary in and of itself. Vale has been following countercultural currents for decades now. His published works include the influential Industrial Cultural Handbook, Modern Primitives, Incredibly Strange Films, Pranks, Zines, among others. His work has opened up numerous cultural avenues and led to major tectonic shifts in U.S. and international countercultural expression. With his partner, Marion Wallace, he continues to work kind of in this new series of small editions, exploring the work of important artists, writers, and musicians. These include William S. Burroughs, J.G. Ballard, Robert Anton Wilson, Bruce Conner, George Kashar, Diane DePrima, Lydia Lunch, amongst others. So I must also add, Vale is an alumnus of City Lights Bookstore, having worked there for many, many years. So it's kind of all in the family here, really kind of a homecoming on both fronts. So it's a great pleasure and an honor to have you both with us here today. Welcome to City Lights Live.
Thank you, that was great.
Thanks for that scholarly introduction. Now I have to do a ton of, is there a jonsavage.com? There should be.
No, I did have one, Vale, but I got bored with it.
Well, just so we know everything that you've done, like Peter probably just hinted at. I doubt if it's a full bibliography, lifeography.
That's a good, that actually is a good thought. I'll construct that somewhere. I do go on Twitter a lot, but I did have a website, and it just felt like, work for no pay, to be honest.
Well, you have to get some young person to maintain it, John. That's the secret. A fan.
I hope you pay them, Vale.
No, you pay them in books, or not cash. Cash is not exactly king, or neither is it despicable. But I prefer to have non-cash relationships with friends.
So anyway, have you read the
tons
book?
of memorabilia you could pay them in, I'm positive.
No.
Do it, John. We need it.
Okay. So,
yeah, let's talk about your new book. I mean,
yes,
you've done
please,
so many books. We got to promote that right off the bat. And I'm sure you had an emotional investment in this project, as in all of our projects. They're not just work for hire, none of them. And I know here, I don't really know much about Joy Division because I wasn't in England, but I thought they were from Manchester, where you were from. I thought you were from Manchester.
Well, in fact, to be absolutely specific, Vale, they were from Salford and Macclesfield. And
Here,
Salford,
Manchester. Why do I associate them with the Hacienda Club there?
Salford is the twin town to Manchester, the town right next to Manchester, and Salfordians hate it when you call them when you say they come from Manchester. And Macclesfield is a small town that is about 20 miles outside Manchester in the Pennines. And in fact, I'm not from Manchester, I'm a Londoner, but I moved to Manchester in April 1979, sorry. And because Tony Wilson, who was the head of Factory Records, just about to be, got me a job in television. And if you remember at that time, jobs in big media were really, really hard to get. Mm-hmm. And he helped me get this job in television. And the deal was that I'd move to Manchester and I'd write about his groups. And his main group was Joy Division. So I was plunged into the heart of it as soon as I got into Manchester. And what I would say is that Joy Division were possibly the most intense group that I've ever seen play live, the most intense performances, more intense than the Sex Pistols, more intense than anyone else you care to mention. I've never seen anything like it before or since, and that's where it all really starts. I was a huge fan. And the other thing, of course, was that I just moved to this very strange city. I don't know what the equivalent to Manchester is like in America, somewhere like Cleveland, probably. Deindustrialized, lots of empty space in the center of the town, very poor, quite grim. And Joy Division helped me make sense of this city. So I actually saw the city that I just moved to through Joy Division. And so it is, to some extent, it is very personal, although there's not a lot of me in the book because I don't like over-personalized books. I think they're very tedious.
Well, I've been to Manchester, but you weren't there, and that's why I interviewed Eartha Kitt for my incredibly strange music book. And the reason I was able to is because it was a small town. If it were London or New York or even San Francisco, I'd never have gotten an interview. But I was driving in a car by a theater marquee, and it said Eartha Kitt. It was like 1 PM. And I just stopped. Let's go in. I'll see if I can get an interview. And sure enough, she was in her dressing room and happy to, or I wouldn't say happy, but willing to do an interview. And I also have other fond memories of Manchester. And on my half a day there, one of the best record stores I've ever been to was there. I don't remember the name, sadly. This is
it has such good record shops. The best record shop in the country, I think, is a record shop called King B, which is in Chorlton, which might have been the one you went to. Used record store. Prices are good. Prices are low. Manchester's a big Black American music town, so it's got a lot of soul, a lot of northern soul, a lot of reggae. Yeah, and so and it's all quite cheap. You can pick up classic 60s singles, Supreme singles for £2 or something. So. I love going there. It does smell a bit on rainy days, though.
What do you mean, smell a bit? Of what?
The clientele, Vale. The clientele.
Oh! Under those barber raincoats or whatever you call them.
Yeah. Saddle men.
Saddle men.
Without girlfriends to tell them they're smelling.
Woo.
So Search and Destroy had actually finished before, I think, before Joy Division really hit. Otherwise, we'd have featured them. I think I'd have gone and done an interview for you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because right after Search and Destroy, the last issue came out February 1979.
There you go.
And then at some point, Jeff Travis came to San Francisco. We spent a night, all night. We stayed up all night talking on my sofa that I know you've sat on. Same sofa is still here. And then he offered me, I was the first American hired to launch Rough Trade Records in San Francisco, at least. That was before New York. And consequently, I rented a storefront, 100 feet from where I live because I'm lazy. I don't want to commute. And that's where the first Rough Trade Records store was. And I remember getting in, I don't know what year it was, the first Joy Division records and how beautiful they were. Like, talk about the design. I mean, what a concept. They didn't look like punk records. They looked gorgeous. I forgot who was responsible for design.
Peter Saville.
That's the Peter Saville. Yeah, now it all comes back. And he ripped off some other books that I have, but we won't go there. But he did beautiful work, very minimalist, but very strongly emotional somehow through the pictures chosen. The format is just gorgeous.
Well, I think that was part of the thing about, I mean, that was an interesting part about Joy Division. The manager, who's a friend of mine called Rob Gretton.
He came into my house. He brought New Order to my house.
And was he great? I loved Rob. He was fantastic.
Yeah, he's great.
And he was the one with the vision. Tony Wilson was the PR guy. He was the kind of Malcolm McLaren catalyst. Come on, let's get things moving. But Rob was the heart and the soul. He really knew music. He really knew soul music. He really knew reggae. And he was the one that said to the group, right, you're a thick bunch of tossers. You're terrible in interviews. You're not going to give any interviews, and the covers will do the talking. And so the covers were a very good way of communication without the group. You don't see pictures of the group on the covers. It was taking the kind of ego and the kind of, out of the whole thing and just making it, this is about the art, this is about the music. And that's actually what the group were like. And that's why they were so good. So in a way, the way they worked and the way they were on stage, it was kind of pure art, pure expression. They weren't thinking about a career, which of course was a great punk era thing for a while anyway, is that there's no money around and people weren't thinking about careers. Right. They were just doing it for the pleasure of doing it, whatever.
It was anti-careerist, actually, kind of. We'd make fun of people who wanted to be rock stars.
And the idea of that lot becoming rock stars was not at that moment, on the table. And so the visuals were a very important part. And of course, this is just the MTV era.
Oh, right.
In fact, the last thing that the group did was to record a pop video for Love Will Tear Us Apart. That was a couple of weeks before, 2 or 3 weeks before Ian committed suicide. So they were just on the cusp of that, of the video era. And it's very interesting about Joy Division is that there's not a lot of visual documentation. There's quite a lot, but not as much as you would think. And that, in a way, it makes it, it makes them kind of hermetic, really, which is always interesting and always guarantees a long lifespan.
I just noticed online that somebody made a long film on either Joy Division, Ian Curtis, or something like that.
Well, there's been 3 films about them, or with them in it. There was a kind of romp called 24-Hour Party People, which I didn't watch because it's very weird when you go and see biopics at Vale and you knew the people well. I just can't get over that.
Oh, I never thought of that. I've never seen any. I'm so
weird.
I'm so non-computer. Wow.
And then there was a film by Anton Corbijn called Control, which was about Ian Curtis. That was a fictional document. That was a fictional film. And it was good because it caught a mood. And then I worked on a documentary called Joy Division. And in fact, the interviews for this book came from the interviews we did with the remaining members of the group for the film. And they just gave us, because I've known them on and off for 40 years, they gave us fantastic interviews. In particular, Bernard Sumner, who spoke for 4 hours. It was just an incredible interview. And if you, as you know, when you make films or programs, you only ever use about 10% of what you actually shoot. So there was all this extra documentation. And I'd done other interviews with the group over the previous, 10 to 15 years. And so I put them all together into this book and then did some new interviews just to, flesh it out. And to also interview some women to get that perspective as well, because otherwise it's all blokes.
Well, there was a woman in the band, Gillian, is that her name? When they came to my house. Pardon? That was New. Sorry, that was New Order. But it was right. It was very shortly after. You do know that Joy Division was supposed to come here. We were anticipating that, and suddenly, and then pretty shortly afterwards, the New Order tour came over with Rob Gretton.
How would they have fit? How would Joy Division have fit into the West Coast scene as it was then?
Oh, I think easily, because I played their records for everyone who came into Rough Trade, and as soon as anyone heard a record, they bought it. I mean, right. Everyone loved them. I mean, they were a big hit. Them and Birthday Party, I played that by Nick, what's his name, Nick Cave, that we hadn't heard of then. He's from Australia then. We're talking either 79 or 80. It's
40 years ago.
Yeah. And the Joy Division, we had no trouble selling those records in Rough Trade.
So they'd have found an audience, as in fact New Order did in the end anyway.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, well. So,
that was sorry.
Well, I'm happy I don't know that much about Joy Division, because you can tell me for the first time. I think you're trying to tell me that there's this whole deeply emotional ambience behind the background that caused the songs that they created to emerge into reality.
Well, I think I'm not going to go astrological on you, so we'll forget about that. Well, actually, I will. Manchester's a city under the sign of Cancer, which is the most emotional sign. And Ian Curtis.
What about the sign? What did you say?
It's a sign of Cancer. It's the most emotional sign.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that.
And Ian Curtis was a Cancer.
Ooh, that makes sense. Wow.
And I have Moon in Cancer, which is a very, very powerful place.
So do I, by the way.
Okay, so it's a very emotional. It's a very emotional placement. And
emotions are more important than intelligence, I might add.
And intuition.
Intuition, super important.
Probably the most important of them all.
It's the most.
But anyway, pop music is all about, the whole point of pop music is that it's distilled emotion in an easily understandable package, I think. And obviously some of pop music is very kind of airsat emotion, as we all know. But even though the group presented as rather sort of austere, there was so much emotion in there. And you look at footage, if you go on to, well, I don't know, you can do it sometime when you have access to a computer. You go onto YouTube and look for Joy Division live, or a couple of their television appearances. Ian used the thing that made, first of all, they all worked really well together. So, they were all in a kind of spinning plates, and they interlocked. And they were very different live to how they were on record. Live, they were really, they wanted to be the Stooges, basically. So it was very raw and aggressive, quite very punky, but not thrash. That was the thing. Punk had become thrash very quickly and became a kind of template. And as you and I were getting very bored with punk by the end of probably the beginning of '79. Joy Division were not punk in that respect.
Oh no.
And Ian would, they used to begin their shows with a song called Dead Souls.
Oh yeah.
And Dead Souls is a fascinating song because I genuinely think, I've talked about this a lot, obviously, over the last year and a half because of the book, and I've been talking about Joy Division for ages. And my ultimate conclusion is that Ian Curtis was channeling. I think he had mediumistic abilities.
Absolutely.
And that comes out in a song, particularly in a song like Dead Souls, where he says, "They keep calling me these visions from the past." And it's pretty spooky. The hairs on the back of your neck kind of start going. And they start with this live. And so they play for the instrumental. It rises and falls and goes around in a circle for 2 minutes before he'd come in. And what he would do, he would use those 2 minutes to kind of work out what the mood of the hall was, work out how far he was going to go.
He was channeling the audience,
yeah,
I bet.
And then he would go. And the only other person I think who did that, they all liked the Doors. And to some extent, I think Ian was quite like Jim Morrison, although obviously the band weren't as big, in that he was interested in seeing how far you could go personally as a performer, and then seeing how far you could go in relation to an audience. And that made every show different. And every show, it was like he was super present. And then he would be absent. I've never seen anything like it. And it was also very strange in relation to time, in that they'd be going very fast and then suddenly they'd stop and then they'd go very fast again. And it would do all sorts of weird things with time.
Great.
Never seen any other group like it.
That's what Blue Cheer did in the early days when I was in the band. We had this great drummer at the very beginning named Paul Whaley.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He commanded the band. He slowed us down and speeded us up. He was amazing because Blue Cheer live was, when I was in them, we were a very improvisatory band. And did you think Joy Division also did some improv live? You know, just maybe stretching out a chorus longer, things like that?
The improv was in Ian's performance.
Okay.
Ian went so far out that the other members of the group had to kind of hold it down.
Yeah.
So you look at them, and Stephen's at the back, Stephen Morris, fantastic drummer.
Yeah.
And then either side, you have Peter Hook and Bernard Sumner standing still most of the time.
Right.
And so they're providing the kind of pillars within which Ian can do what he wants.
Oh, okay.
So the improv, all eyes really were on Ian, and he would do this manic dancing, and he would just go really into it. And then suddenly he'd look really tired and exhausted, and he'd go like that. And then he'd start off again. So you could see that every performance took an enormous amount out of him. And I think that was also part of the problem, because in the end, he was trying to do something very experimental in a not particularly well organized or not particularly safe arena, because we know what rock shows are like. You know, you've got a lot of idiots sometimes, you've got a lot of drunk people, you've got equipment breaking down, you've got all sorts. It's not like an art gallery or something where everything is controlled. It's pretty random a lot of the time. And so that would be a difficult thing for him to do, as it happened. And I think that was part of his problem in the end.
No, it makes total sense that he gave himself the freedom to just go almost enter a trance state and go out there and be totally in the present, in the moment, and go as far out there emotionally as he went. But then he'd have to just suddenly recharge. Maybe I played a gig with Jim Morrison, at Avalon Ballroom, and it was an amazing gig. There weren't actually that many people there, and I saw Jim Morrison. He would like you know, really go out there and emote and with his chest out and stuff. But he did mostly sing with his eyes closed. But I also saw him like sort of retreat into himself, look with his eyes closed and recharge. I
Yeah,
think that makes total sense.
and that's what Ian did. By the way, Vale, I'd have loved to have gone to the Avalon.
Yeah, thank you for that. It was
I would have
best,
loved
way
it.
better than the Fillmore, because it was
Oh,
a
I'd have loved
real.
to have gone to it. Well, it was
Pardon?
Chet Helms, wasn't it? It was Chet
Yeah,
Helms.
well, it wasn't just he wasn't this autocrat. It was just a whole collective of really nice people. I knew a lot of them. It was a very collective, you know, ballroom, somehow non-fascist, hierarchical, if that's possible. And
And also lovely sprung floor, apparently.
you know, I wasn't aware of that. I mean, you're probably right. Everyone danced their hippie dances then, or not. I wouldn't call them hippie dances there, but they were like no rules dances. You know, like totally, again, channeling. And you could make any movement you wanted.
Well, Paul Whaley was also one of my favorite. I loved that period in San Francisco. I was a huge San Francisco music fan when I was in my teens. And I loved that kind of 65, 66 garage bands rather than the officially approved Ralph J. Gleason canon, you know? So I love the Oxford Circle. They did that fantastic single, Foolish Woman. And Paul Whaley was in the Oxford Circle.
No, I remember. Yeah, he played with us. Blue Cheer played a gig at UC Davis in some huge auditorium, and we were supported by Oxford Circle. And it was at that show that he was drafted to be the Blue Cheer drummer. And they already had a record out. I remember.
I wish I could hear early Blue Cheer gigs.
Me too. I wish there were more recordings, because we did a lot of improv live. And that's when it was a 6-piece with me in it. When I played keyboards, I would try to double solo behind the guitar player, but I would, you know, with his scales and stuff. So we'd almost have twin solos going on, but you had to be there live to hear that.
Oh, so so yeah, so the improv was in Ian's performance. That was the improv.
Okay.
And it was incredibly focused. They were very disciplined in some ways. But also they had that side that, as I said, they wanted to be, you know, Ian wanted to be Iggy Pop, or what he'd read about Iggy Pop, you know. And as a lot of people did in the UK in the late 70s. You know, there was something about Iggy, who in fact got some of his shtick off Jim Morrison. You read the Iggy biogs, and he says, well, you know, I went to see the Doors in Detroit, somewhere like Cobo Hall, and Jim Morrison managed to piss everybody off in the audience. And I thought, that's for me. But Ian wasn't confrontational with like, fuck you, or anything like that. It was more the intensity of feeling. And that was the confrontation, you know, do you want to go as far as I'm going? This is really, you know, they were really fucking serious. They just came out on stage and did it. There was no messing about. There was no half-assed stage announcements. It was just, you know, there's 2 live shows recorded. And in the UK, we watched one of them recorded on poor quality video, but the sound's fine. And we watched a kind of half-an-hour performance in a big cinema theatre, and bloody hell, by the end, everybody was just wrung out. It was so intense.
Well, you know, there's a lot more in the background and foundation of Joy Division than people suspect. Like for example, you know that I did a J.G. Ballard book, by the way, whom you interviewed for me, called The Atrocity Exhibition, and I heard that you gave Ian Curtis a copy of Ballard's Atrocity Exhibition, and then he wrote a song for Joy Division called Atrocity Exhibition. Do you know all about all that?
Well, if it does, I can't, if I did, I can't remember. But there's a very important point.
I'm sure you did. I'm sure you gave him a copy.
I mean, it could have been. I mean,
Oh,
you know.
no.
I was, I was smoking joints then, so my memory about a lot of that has gone. I didn't know the group very well. I didn't want to know the group very well because I was still a rock journalist then, and I didn't think that rock journalists should hang about with bands. I thought it just didn't work.
Huh.
I was friendly with Tony and Rob and Martin Hannett, who was their producer. Martin Hannett was probably responsible for me not remembering anything because he was a chemist and used to have the best drugs. And they were all a bit older than Joy Division. Joy Division were about 3 years younger than me. So that makes a difference at that age, in your mid-20s. But they were like, Joy Division, it was that moment in popular culture, which you know very well because you helped to pioneer this really, much more than the English music press and Search and Destroy. Reading the early Search and Destroys was so great because you'd get pieces about John Waters, you get pieces about Burroughs, you'd get a wider range of cultural input, and you'd actually ask groups about what books they read. Hello, books read, people reading, and what films they liked, and all that sort of stuff, which gave a much wider context. And people still read a lot of books then, and people still watched a lot of non-commercial films. And there was this whole kind of underground still counterculture, and Joy Division very much came out of that. Ian and Stephen in particular were kind of science fiction heads. And they'd go, and in the UK, I don't know if it was the same in the US, probably not. We had these weird bookshops in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. And they sold everything weird under the sun. So you'd have the science fiction section, you'd have secondhand pop culture books from the 60s, you'd have war magazines, you'd have cheap war books, you'd have soft porn, and you'd have them all mixed up in the same shop. So it was this kind of, Gnostic material that you could find all in one place in a kind of pretty much unsorted way. And, there were shops like that in London that I used to haunt. And Joy Division haunted that kind of shop in Manchester. And he would read Burroughs. There's a very good interview done by a friend of mine called Alan Hempsall, who was in a band called Crispy Ambulance, and he actually talked to Ian about his reading. And he says at the interview, Ian came to the interview with a copy of APO 33.
Oh, that's rare.
Which was a Beach Books pamphlet, wasn't it?
Yes, and it was, what it was about. APO 33 was a real cure for heroin, that addiction that Burroughs was messianic about. John Dent and all that.
Well, he had that, and
yeah,
I remember you used to be able to buy those. You used to be able to buy Beach Books pamphlets, TV Baby. It was Beach Books pamphlets, and Claude Pellier, very cheap in Compendium in London.
Ooh, Compendium was great. And there was what's that sci-fi bookstore downtown? I can't remember the name.
Dark They Are.
Forbidden Planet. Forbidden Planet. What?
Forbidden Planet. There was another one called Dark They Were and Golden Eyed.
Huh. Well, there were a bunch of bookstores that were great right near Foyles, whatever neighborhood that is in London.
Soho. It was Soho and
Soho.
Around there.
Yeah, I spent all my money at those stores.
All gone. Everything gone.
Yeah, what a tragedy.
And so there was this, and so you'd get. I know you could also, from Compendium, you could also get Situationist pamphlets. And
Definitely.
Tony was very into the Situationists.
Yeah, I bought out of those.
I did a bit of research on this, and I thought Tony Wilson had got into the Situationists through Malcolm McLaren and Jamie Reed, but he hadn't. He was into them when he was at university in 1972-3, because we had access to Tony Wilson's archive in the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester, and he had these, these pre-punk pamphlets, and he was incredibly influenced by the Situationists, in particular that great founding Situationist poster done at Nanterre, where you have the two cowboys. He was absolutely obsessed by that. What are you doing? I'm just drifting. What are you thinking about? I'm just thinking about reification. you know. I got one of those, and I got one of those. And
I never saw that poster. I don't remember it. Wow. Good for you.
I'll send you I need to send you a whole bunch of things anyway. I'll talk about that later. So, you know, it was a fascinating period where the real underground could actually get expression in a wider context, which still had focus, which means that, you know, book titles that came from, you know, Russian novelists or from
Gogol, Dead Souls,
could get into and onto records that were bought by hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah, right.
So,
John, you got to tell everyone what Joy Division means, where it came from.
Okay, right, okay, yeah. This was the Nazi books phase.
Yes.
And you know, they obviously went to the popular bookstore, and while looking at the science fiction, found this memoir by somebody who'd been in a concentration camp, and Joy Division was the name that they gave to the hut or huts where women forcibly entertained German soldiers. So it was pretty, you know, it was pretty brutal. But then that was the time, you know, I always remember you talking to me, saying to me, and that was the time, it was brutal. You know, you had the Screamers reading Violent World, and you had the Ramones singing about Nazis and coming on stage and, you know, wearing T-shirts with unpleasant slogans. You know, it was people really going into the dark side. And I do think some of that in retrospect was irresponsible and stupid, but it was a different time. I mean, this is a very serious subject. Part of me thinks that it's to do with the proper examination of what happened in the Second World War. And part of me thinks it's kids being annoying and stupid and obnoxious.
Yeah, but people who read books, I generally think are kind of deeper. And I think there's a huge, you know, tapping of the dark side in Joy Division.
Yeah, very much.
I mean, so. But based on actually reading books, which is a very solitary occupation, you invoking your imagination. And people who read books, you know, I'm much more drawn to them than whoever the other people are.
Well, I think that, well, of course, what happens with names anyway is that they just become a band name. So, you know, it becomes detached from the original meaning. And I think that there was a lot of the dark side in Joy Division, but there's also a lot of light. And that's why I wanted to call the book This Searing Light, because one of the problems, well, in two ways. First off, because Ian had epilepsy, very serious grand mal.
Oh, I didn't know that. Holy cow.
He had very serious epilepsy. Jeez. And so strobe lights or flashing lights would set him off into a fit on stage. So they had bright white light on stage, fixed white light. One. Two, the energy of the music and the power of the music was for me, was full of light. And the fact that it was, you know, it wasn't just somebody being doomy and gothy, thank God, because I can't stand all that. Can't bear it. So there was a kind of balance between the light and the dark. And people have because Ian committed suicide, everybody gets into this really doomy thing about Joy Division, but that's not how I or the people around the group or the people who were fans of the group experienced it at the time while they were going, because Ian hadn't died yet. So we didn't know that Ian was going to die. So to actually retrospectively cast Joy Division in this very doomy light is incorrect. That's not how it happened. So it's also trying to be a proper historian, and which I do attempt to be, because otherwise it's just bullshit. To try and record, and you do this because you recorded so many things. It's data, it's stuff that's on the record. It's trying to accurately reconstruct what was going on at the time and the place. And nobody knew Ian was going to die until he did. And it was an awful, shattering event. It was a dreadful event. I don't remember anything people tell me I did things, you know, after Ian died, and I don't remember, you know, I came around to their house with a bottle of whiskey or something. I don't remember anything. And so part of going back into all this is kind of going back to how I was when I was 26, which is kind of crucial time in your life anyway. And going back into and trying to find out, so certainly for myself, why did Ian commit suicide? Well, I think the prime reason was his illness. From that, everything else stemmed. Because, and people say this very persuasively in the book, that if you're very, very ill, and he was seriously ill, he had epilepsy, very, very serious attacks, incapacitating attacks. And also, they didn't know how to treat it then particularly well. So he was on very heavy barbiturates, which aren't going to help. You know, the treatment to make him get better, it made him worse. And then, so, you know, you've got this terrible thing. Am I ever going to get better? You know, is this what it's going to be like for all my life? And then add the stresses and strains of not being in love with your wife anymore and wanting to be with somebody else, yet having a child by your wife, and also being the lead, you know, the charismatic lead singer of a group who were just about to become enormous, then you can see why he just quit.
Yeah, but you know, there's the other musicians created so much beauty. So I think beauty is a counterpoint to darkness, I suppose. I mean, there's a lot of just gorgeous stuff that the band generated.
Well, the most obvious one is Atmosphere, which is like, you know, Phil Spector on acid, basically. That was Martin as well, and it was done with quite simple equipment. But also they were just getting involved with the digital age. And the interesting thing about Martin is that Martin was a generation older. He was born in 1948, and he was a proper stoner. And he'd been a hippie, and he had long hair in '79 when I first met him. And he was interested in sound that works on the mind, the kind of psychoacoustics. And he also had the idea that he wanted his recordings for factory to sound like the recordings that Electro had made in the later '60s. So he had this, you know, he loved the sound on those Electro albums by the Doors and Clear Light and people like that. So again, there's that link to the Doors. I mean, I love the Doors, who wouldn't? But you know, so that was, and that was another part of the equation. Was Martin kind of psychedelicizing them, and that was the final link, really.
When you say psychedelicizing, what do you mean? I mean, adding like a lot of echo here and there, or, you know, reverberations, or things like on Miles Davis' Bitches Brew that keep repeating in the background. And I don't know, this electronicness.
If you listen to Unknown Pleasures carefully, which I had to do recently because I was talking about it, and I was quite stunned by it because there's lots of weird noises throughout the whole album.
Great. That's what I wanted to get to, noise.
It's like electronic slippage.
Yes.
It's like time lapse. It's like all this stuff that works on your subconscious, and it's destabilizing, but it's also, and this reminds me of how Manchester was, you know, it's kind of eerie and spooky, but it's also comforting in a weird way. Lots of backward sound, which is very enveloping. I love backward sound. And the first time I met Martin, and it was in April '79 when he was recording Unknown Pleasures. And I went to Strawberry Studios, which is in Stockport. And always with Martin, the first thing you did when you got to see him was, okay, here's this, you'd smoke a joint. Then we went into the studio and he was mucking about. In the corner of the studio was a lift. And he was mucking about in the lift. And I said, well, Martin, what are you doing? Where's the band? The band went in the studio, he'd packed them off somewhere. And I said, go and have a cup of tea. And he was messing around in the corner in this lift. And in this lift in the corner of the studio, he had a Leslie speaker, which, as you know, is a rotating thing that kind of oscillates, basically. and he was recording with the Leslie speaker in the lift as it went up and down.
Wow.
And that's the song you can hear, that's the sound you can hear on one of the songs on Unknown Pleasures. I think it's Insight. And the other thing they were using, which was very interesting in a rock format, and they were basically a rock group, was synthetic percussion.
Yeah.
And Rob Grattan was very, very, because he liked Northern Soul and soul, he liked disco.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the great unmentionable until 77, 78. And then suddenly, I mean, I got to realize that disco was the future in summer 77 when I heard I Feel Love. And I just thought, that's it, you know, punk's over. It's just redundant. This is the future.
Donna Summer.
Donna Summer is fucking amazing. Love. And then Throbbing Gristle, obviously. And then you had in 78, you had Throbbing Gristle on the normal, making great electronic records.
That reminds me, we played that during layout meetings at Search and Destroy. We played that Donna Summer, I Feel Love. Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's great.
Well, we played Giorgio Moroder. We played all kinds of things that people don't call punk at our layout meetings, because there weren't that many records then that we had in 77 and 78. We even played, you know, Lou Reed's Metal Machine music on a cassette. We played that. No, an 8-track, sorry.
I have an 8-track of Metal Machine music downstairs. I mean, come on. That's great. I love that record. Yeah. Noise.
It's noise. It's good for layout meetings.
That's why I liked punk in the first place, because it was noise.
Right. It was forbidden frontier, piercing the veil kind of thing.
You know, you go into, I remember going to see, in particular, the groups at the Roxy, which is a small place in early 77. And everybody would turn their guitars up to 11. So the guitars would distort, and then the harmonics would just fly all over the place. And it was just this wall of noise. And I remember the sound very distinctly. It was, ah, like that. And it just, the whole set, you couldn't hear any tune on the guitar. It was just, ah. And then, you know, the bass had to carry the tune, and you know, it was just great. And I've always liked loud guitars. That's why I liked punk in the first place. It was loud guitars, come on, and fast.
Oh, Jimi Hendrix was the most amazing when he actually, you know, Cream was amazing live. Live is not the same as records, and it's really different. And I remember seeing Cream live and blown away, but then Jimi Hendrix just took it somewhere even beyond when he first played the Fillmore.
Yeah, I'd love to have seen them. I never did.
I hope someone should have recorded those live shows. Darn. Maybe they're out there. Who knows? First time at Fillmore.
So, I mean, so actually live, Bernard's guitar would be really loud and distorted. It would slice through everything. And I love guitars that slice through everything. I just think it's fantastic. Another fantastic, actually, I should, in the punk era, another great group was the Saints.
Oh, they're under-recognized. I saw them play here real early in the punk scene.
They're so good.
They were so good. The Saints, definitely under-recognized. Yes,
and that guitarist,
Stranded is an instant hit.
Yeah. And so that was I can't remember how we got onto this, but anyway, noise. And so Martin really, the band were unhappy with the production on the first record because Martin kind of tamped down the guitars. So Bernard's guitar did not sound as raw as it did live. But then he made it psychedelic. You listen to a record like Candidate, and the guitar is just a smear. And the extraordinary thing about Unknown Pleasures, the first side, there's only 2 up-tempo tracks. There are 3 dirges. And Joy Division did brilliant dirges. And you know, I don't usually like dirges, but I do love Joy Division's dirges. And they had 3 of them on the first side, which is ballsy for, you know, the first album by a new group. But the first recording I thought that really got how they sounded live was Dead Souls they played, which was a group performance. And the other record of theirs I loved in '79 when I was living in Manchester, because it sounded like suffocation, was a song called Autosuggestion, which is an obscure song. It's absolutely wonderful. It just sounds like you're slowly drowning in Manchester rain, basically. So those are my two. That and my final favorite Joy Division song was a song called These Days. And there's a wonderful shot in the book. It was recorded in January 1980 with Martin. There's a wonderful shot of Bernard working with Martin, and Bernard's behind Martin. Martin's twiddling a knob. Martin is putting Bernard's guitar through some piece of digital technology, closing the gate really, really fast. So there's almost no input, and making it sound like a synthesizer. So they were really working on technology. And Stephen, at the same time, Stephen was using syndrums like he used to get on disco records, like, oh, what's that record? Anita Ward, Ring My Bell, Ring My Bell, boom, 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 boom. But then they kind of made it into experimental rock. So instead of just making us an occasional hook in the song, they went overboard and made it sound like a flock of marauding seagulls. So, and, you know, now we associate rock music with kind of, you know, nostalgia, Luddite tendencies. But then Joy Division, as New Order became, were technological and futuristic. And that's what also made them very interesting. You know, and so, you know, I mean, I find it fascinating because in the end of '76, the Clash were moaning on about Moog synthesizer, but within 9 months, I feel Love had almost sort of made the Clash irrelevant. Well, it's okay.
They were wearing.
I saw them very early on in '76. I saw them twice in '76, and they were fantastic because they didn't have any money, they didn't have a record contract, and they seemed like hurt, scared boys. Of course, all that went out of the window and they became a gang. And to me, this, by the end of '77, so to me, this seemed like very old information, because part of punk was that it had to be new. And part of that novelty was kind of different gender roles. This is off the topic of Joy Division, but I always liked Susie, Slits, X-Ray Specs, and on the other side, Buzzcocks, Subway Sect, the groups who were doing something different with gender and expression of what it was to be male and what it was to be female. And the Clash were just like a bloody boys gang. I hated it after a while. Which is one of the reasons I didn't want to hang around with bands, which is one of the reasons I didn't know Joy Division then. You know, I got to know them much better in the last few years, actually, particularly Stephen, who's wonderful, and Bernard. But I didn't hang around with them then. I used to go to gigs and say hi backstage, and that was it, really. People say, oh, did you know Ian? And I say, well, to be honest, I can't remember one word I said to him. I must have said stuff to him, but I can't remember anything. Because it wasn't like that, you know. Actually, I got on back in the day with Peter Hook very well. I remember Bernard was very sarcastic, still can be, and he came up to me at a gig in Sheffield, must have been in Cabaret Voltaire gigs, they were very close, and that's another electronic side to it.
Right.
And Bernard came up to me at Cabaret Voltaire, goes, John, I just read a book. And I said, oh yeah, Bernard, great, you know, what was it? Sven Hassel, Wheels of Terror. And it's a pulp Nazi book. And I said, oh God, thanks, Bernard, that's really great. And that's part of that, you know, winding people up, which is a very Mancunian occupation.
No, I knew other British punks that turned me on to Sven Hassel, and I got a bunch of his books. That is a sideline or a detour. but you remind me of something else that you said earlier. I thought I'd read that in one show very early, Throbbing Gristle had somehow set up a bunch of searchlights or something aimed at the audience, and they played. And then another band imitated that later. I can't remember their name.
You know, I know they were friendly, and to some extent, Joy Division were in this sort of rough nexus with Cabaret Voltaire and Throbbing Gristle. That was the kind of, they were the kind of rock end of it.
Boy, didn't time go by fast, John. I can't believe you were here in 42 years ago at my house.
Well, I've been looking at all those pictures. Ruby took some fantastic pictures. And I still look at them and I think, wow, that was a mind-blowing trip. And I remember so many things. I remember going to, the best thing you did was take me along to Target to see the Screamers do Vertigo and 122 Hours of Fear. That was amazing.
Yeah.
And the Screamers were amazing. Anyway, we should start winding this up, I guess. Is there anything else we need to talk about for another few minutes?
Well, I feel that one reason Joy Division was so unique was because they weren't in London. They were in, this strange place that I've visited called Manchester. Manchester has its beauty and its, to me, I took a drive all around it. It's, but what I noticed the most is there's hardly anybody walking on the streets anywhere.
Yeah, Manchester was really where I came of age. I think what happened, and not just with Tony Wilson and Factory and Joy Division, but what happened particularly after Buzzcocks, and Buzzcocks were crucial in this, but also even happened before Buzzcocks with 10cc, who actually opened Strawberry Studios, proper facility in the Manchester area, is that and then with Buzzcocks and all the other groups that followed them, and also, so you had New Hormones label, you had Rabid Records, you had Slaughter of the Dogs and Martin Hannett and Jilted John, and you had another label called Obscure. So by the time Factory was starting, there were 4 local labels.
Yeah.
And so Manchester had this infrastructure. And I've always thought that Manchester is, it's a city with a lot of soul. And it's a very big, as I said, it's a very, very big black music city. And people don't realize this because everybody thinks about, Joy Division, the Smiths, Oasis, etc. Huge black music city. And it's small enough that everything's centralized. It is big enough that it draws in a lot of people from the surrounding area. So it's got a huge catchment area. And Manchester used to be at various times an entertainment centre. So people would come from all over the northwest of England into Manchester at the weekends. And so it has a very, and it's much more easy, it's much easier to get to, say, than Liverpool. Liverpool's out on a limb, although it's another great city. So, those are cities I have enormous affection for and strong links with. My father was brought up in Liverpool, in Merseyside, and I still live in the northwest of the UK, although it's in Wales. I'm about an hour and a half from Manchester. So, I'm not living down in the south, which has again become very different, or in London, which I couldn't bear anymore. So it's, and Manchester do reflect the city, partly because of the sense of space and ambience that you get in the recorded sound. And I think that was Martin's genius, certainly for me, to help me to interpret the city through the sound of the record.
Oh, tell me a little bit about 2 things that I really don't know anything about. One is Northern Soul. What the heck is that? And the second is Hacienda Club.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Northern Soul, basically, in the late 60s, Northern Soul, basically, to sum it up in 2 words, a knockoff Motown.
Great.
The success of Motown, particularly 64, 65, 66, 67, meant that there were loads of labels in America trying to reproduce that sound without the budget, and often without, I have to say, without the genius. So basically, a Northern Soul record is classic sort of 1966 sound, and it has, a lot of them have vibes.
Vibes?
Vibes, yeah, as in the instrument.
Okay.
And Northern Soul is something I want to like more than I actually do. because I listen to them and I just think this is knockoff Motown, and I'd rather listen to Motown because Motown's fucking great. Because it's got James Jamerson on it, and it's got Holland-Dozier Holland, and it's got, you know, and Berry Gordy was a genius hit picker. And but you had thousands of small labels in America producing a Motown knockoffs and dance music in that same style. And what happened, so you're talking 65, 66, 67, top years. And what happened in the late 60s is that people in London were starting to get into funk because Sly and the Family Stone had happened. You got the psychedelic, Motown, you got Cloud 9, Temptations. Funk was beginning to hit, which is a completely different animal. And people in the North didn't want that. They wanted to stay 4 on the floor. And so by the early 70s, it had become this huge cult, or in places like a Wigan Casino, where people would dig out these old soul records from America. They'd scratch the labels so nobody would know what the records were. And then they'd play them in the clubs, and these kids would take speed and dance them all night, wearing great clothes and doing fantastic dances. It was a real, you know, authentic working class culture.
Wait a minute. Northern Soul, I don't know why. I always thought it involved a bunch of black people. Is that not true?
There were black people in the audience, but it's a lot of whites. There's footage of it, and there are a few black people there, but it's mainly Northern Soul. The black people were starting to get, by the early to mid 70s, they're starting to get into reggae and funk properly, you know, because that was a golden era of black American music and black Jamaican music. So, you know, it was I'd say, you know, 80%, 90% white kids.
Okay.
And all wearing Oxford bags and taking speed.
They're all wearing what?
Oxford bags, really, really baggy trousers.
Oh, I see. Wow.
So it had a whole kind of set of clothing to go with it, which is great.
And okay, and then the Hacienda Club.
Okay, the Hacienda opened in May 1982. Which was,
that late? Oh, I didn't know that.
Which was 2 years after Ian died. And that was Rob's idea. He wanted to open a new, because what had happened was that after Ian died, Bernard in particular had started to get into disco and dance music, which is entering a very interesting period in the late 70s, because you had almost environmental ambient records like, I don't know, Underwater by Harriet Thurman and Supernature by Chironi, which were these real visual epics. And Bernard went to the Metropole Club in Germany, taken by his friend Mark Reeder, who's also a friend of mine. And Bernard said in an interview with me that he realized there was another purpose to music, which is to lift you up. And you can hear them. I mean, the turning point for New Order, as far as I was concerned, was Everything's Gone Green, which is a 1981 single, which is fantastic. And it's got the Marauder synth pulse, you know. And then they went to New York and hung around a lot in probably Paradise Garage and the Fun House. And Rob decided, well, let's open a New York style disco in Manchester. And it was a miserable failure.
Oh.
It was a total failure for the first few years. I used to go all the time, and there was honestly, Val, there was nobody there.
Why? That's crazy.
Because it was too advanced for the time. You know, the people, this is still a very small subculture, because it was historically correct. People tend to think that more people were involved than they were. Same with Joy Division. A lot of the times they played Manchester, 100, 200 people, that was it, you know.
Oh, great.
So it was very much like, you know, the early days of West Coast punk. It was still small. Yeah. And I DJ'd there during the first year before I left Manchester at the end of 1982. And I would play, me and the other DJs, we played a mixture of Soft Cell. I played Torch by Soft Cell a lot, Gang of Four, New Order, and then early electro hip-hop records. So Peach Boys, Don't Make Me Wait. I can send you a list of all this stuff.
Yeah, please.
E.T. Boogie by the Extra T's, and kind of weird, early, fun, electro, hip hop, rap records, stuff coming from the States. Play a lot of that. The sound system was shit. There wasn't the audience for it. The place was like a bloody barn. It was far too big for the people who were there, you know, for the amount of people who were there. But it was kind of great. It did have a bar in the basement, which was just disgusting because it would just condense, and basically every time you go down there, the walls were dripping and the floor would be just swimming in condensation. It was disgusting. So it only really took off, you know, in the late 90s when people discovered ecstasy, and that's a whole other story.
Whoa. Yeah, I noticed that you have sort of bookended punk with, I thought you did something on the 60s before punk. And I started on YouTube, I found a few movies, you know, the Taste of Honey era films, because I love the styles before punk. I guess Carnaby Street, you know, their mod or whatever you call it.
Well, I did a book called 1966, which was
Well, that's a peak year.
The total peak year, and actually, you'd like it, Vale.
I would now, because I just, you know, at the beginning of COVID, I don't know, I just got possessed to look for all the footage I could find on showing the styles in around 65, 66, like in the
Well, again,
rollout.
I can direct you to a lot of that. I mean, that was a wonderful period for me because I was 12, 13.
Ooh.
And I was loving the Byrds, and I was loving Dylan, and I was loving the Beatles, and I was loving the Rolling Stones. It was painted black, paperback writer, da-da, fucking great. And so, yeah, but I stopped being interested. I mean, you know, my thing about punk is that it really is, I put it all together. You know, after the Hearing Low, and then there's a wonderful Euro disco record called Space, Magic Fly by Space, which is a synthetic disco record. And then I feel like I started getting really bored of punk. There were all these terrible music industry punk groups. And it was getting really aggressive and unpleasant. And I remember I had the chance to go and see the Sex Pistols at the end of the year in Brunel. Somebody said, "You coming, John?" I said, "Can't be bothered." And I couldn't be bothered. I'd had it. I mean, I wasn't interested in punk beyond 79, really, except for Crass.
Same. Except for who, Crass?
Crass, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Crass.
I wasn't interested in them musically. I was interested in them as an art project.
I was interested in the thinking.
Yeah,
exactly. I like the interviews are very important to get what their people are really thinking about that you don't know just by listening to a record.
But that was my ending with punk, really. And so, you know, by you know, Joy Division were really sort of one of my roots out of it. Later, you know, 79, 80.
Yeah, I agree. I have you know, friends are a parallel existence. I have this same thing happen to me. I mean, you wrote the introduction, remember, to the Industrial Culture Handbook, which came out in early 1983, not the end of 83, early. And
I was over it by then. I was over it by then.
Exactly, you were over that. That was very prescient, smart, ahead of your time.
I think they weren't on Joy Division were not on a power trip. If you met them, they were kind of quite sweet, normal guys. You know, they weren't interested in being traditional rock stars. And they just made this absolutely wonderful music, and they played these absolutely wonderful shows. And I think this is the last thing I will say. It was very satisfying for me with the book because I finally understood why Ian committed suicide, which is something I hadn't understood for 40 years. And it's because of the reasons I told you earlier. And the prime factor, not the, you know, the infamous love affair, you know, not torturing himself for his art and all that bullshit, his illness. He was really, really ill. and he was really young, and he didn't know how to deal with it. And I don't blame him, actually. It's an awful thing to do. You know, one of the first things I wrote, a retrospective of Joy Division, I wrote after Kurt Cobain committed suicide, because I'd interviewed Kurt Cobain, and I really, really liked him, and I thought Nirvana were just incredible. And they were the last rock group I really liked, because after that I just thought, right, well, that's it. You know, I can't be invested in a rock group anymore after that. I've just had it. But you know, it's an awful, violent act to commit, and it just leaves this huge hole. And so the book was an attempt, to some extent, for me, and hopefully for people who read it, to fill some of that hole. And the hole will never be filled, but it's an attempt to explain and to put it into context and to tell a great story. It's a great story.
Thank you.
He's back. He's back.
We're about out of time, but you know, this has been delightful and edifying in ever so many ways, and I'm so grateful to both of you for agreeing to be.
Well, I've loved it. I've had a great. We could carry on for ages, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Well,
gentlemen.
this has been marvelous. Thank you very much for organising
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
It has been fun.
And great to see you, Vale. And we had a really good chat.
Yeah.
And we will continue it.
Please. Any excuse will do. Thank you.
And look after yourself in these bloody COVID times.
Well, I just totally stay home. Same for you.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Okay, Vale. Great to see you. Looking
Yeah.
well. Okay.
Cheers.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.